Welcome to the Source Weekly's endorsement interviews for candidates in the upcoming May election. We are spending some time today with Janet Llerandi. We are grateful for her taking the time as she runs for the Bend Lapine School Board. Janet, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
So why don't we just start with you introduce yourself and say why you're running for the position.
Great. Yeah. So again, my name is Janet Sarai Llerandi. I am running for Zone 7 on the Bend Lapine School Board, School District Board of Directors. I'm a mom. I'm a parent of 2 Bend Lapine students. And so I'm really excited for this campaign and to be potentially a new board member.
Great. So just tell us briefly, what is your biggest concern for students of the district?
One of my biggest concerns is what I'm hearing from the community. I have very close ties and connections to a lot of Latino families, Spanish-speaking families, and migrant families that are currently within the school district. One of the greatest challenges that I think COVID exposed was the access to information, access to technology, and the intentional outreach to some of these communities that have been marginalized even within our educational district. So one of the greatest challenges with that, again, is that information being relayed to parents in a way that is easy to digest, easy to read, in a language that they understand, and honoring those experiences from folks that have migrated to our country. In addition to the access to technology, we all live on a virtual world now. However, that was not the case for families before. And there was a big struggle, a big challenge for those families and a big barrier placed before them to say, you have to have functioning technology that's up to date. You have to have internet service at home and fast internet service. Those are barriers that I think for the most of us are commonplace. You know, we don't see them as a big challenge. And I think that is part of the problem is there's a disconnect between the cultures and between the experiences of families that is not being listened to, and it's not being honored in a way that supports all families and students.
What do you feel makes a good school board member, in your opinion?
Somebody that's passionate about the education and curriculum and environments that we're sending our students to. I think that for a lot of parents, the school board has typically been sort of, I guess I have time, I'll do it. And not for all school board members. I'm not saying that that's the case for our current school board members, but I think it was often seen as sort of an extracurricular thing or something to volunteer for. For myself, somebody that comes in with an incredible passion and drive and force to see improvements for our own children and for those that we work in community with, that is what we need. Is we need somebody that can advocate strongly for all students across the board, not just our own.
Thanks for that. So the legislature is poised to pass a bill that will allow local governments the option to ban people with concealed carry permits from bringing firearms into public buildings. Do you believe that all schools and the district office for Bend Lapine schools should be gun-free zones where anyone who has a concealed weapon would be required to check it at the door?
So to answer your question quickly, yes, I do feel that that ban should take effect in our public schools, not only in Bend Lapine, but across our state and across the country. With that, I do want to ensure that voters know that I am in full support of folks' Second Amendment right. We do have a right to feel protected and feel that our safety is ensured and that of our families. So this isn't a question of infringing on that right to own a gun or to carry one, whether we have a concealed weapons permit or not. The question is, does it belong in our schools? Does it belong in an environment that should foster welcoming environments, that should foster care and support and should foster safety for all students and staff? Bringing a gun to school also evokes a different sense for different people. For some folks, it evokes safety, you know, that feeling of safety. For others, it actually evokes a sense of fear and uncertainty. And so we need to look at the broader picture, and we need to understand that bringing a gun to school does not mean the same for everyone. And there are valid and solid reasons why that's important to address. And it's also, again, incredibly important to say, we're not trying to take guns away from folks. We just need to regulate how they show up, where they show up, and why they should not show up in schools.
The legislature in March allocated $250 million for summer programs to help students catch up and gain enrichment following this past year of online instruction. How do you think that funding should be used when it comes to this district?
I have had the great privilege and advantage to get a lot of in-depth context to these bills and this legislation that's on the table, in addition to others. From the perspective that I'm coming in from an early childhood education sector, from the nonprofit that I direct, and as the finance coordinator of Better Together in the Early Learning Hub, my experience has been that this bill that we're talking specifically about, it is incredibly critical and crucial for those families that have been disconnected, who have disengaged, who have experienced that academic loss, for them to first feel supported at home so that we can then ask them to come back, to participate, and to support their children's education. But we cannot put one before the other. We have to find out first what is happening at home, what are the barriers, how can we address those, and how can we invest intentionally in the communities that have been affected the most. That learning loss and the graduation rates, it's sad to say that Oregon is not doing great, and there are a lot of contributing factors to that. So in addition to this piece of legislation, there are other bills that are happening, such as changing curriculum so that it's based on African American studies, so that it's based on Latinx history. And this is part of a bigger systemic issue that's happening, not just in Ben Lapine, but across Oregon, is that we are expecting our students to maintain a level of achievement and of curriculum that has them starting at a lower tier than other students. And so first we need to address this gap before we ask students to come up here. So again, this encompasses something much broader than just summer learning and programs, although that will be a great benefit. I hope that it's done in a way that honors the differences in our cultures, the differences in how we learn and how we access information, the differences in abilities for each student too is very important.
Great, thanks. What is your overall impression of how the district has handled the COVID-19 pandemic, and what might you have done differently had you been on the board at that time?
What I've experienced and seen, again, in those various hats that I wear and as a parent of Ben Lapine students, is that the district has made every possible effort to do what honors all families. And there was no one right way or one right answer to address this, or to do it in a way that everybody feels 100% happy. But the work that has gone into the planning and the having to readjust, because there's new standards, there's new protocols, there's new information, ODE constantly updating, guidelines. It would have been incredibly challenging for any board to try to make these big decisions that would, again, honor all families. I think that they did the absolute best job that we could have expected out of them, given the circumstances. Yes, there are gaps, but that doesn't mean that the intention was wrong. I think that our school district, our interim superintendent has done an incredible job of dealing with the cards that she was dealt. And it's the unfortunate reality that it still is not supporting all families. And so we need to address that.
So this past year has brought increased attention to the needs of people of color and students of color within the school district. And you've talked about this a little bit in the run up to this question, but I wondered if you could take a deeper dive and just explain what, if any, changes you would make or propose in the district to better meet those needs of those students.
Yeah, this is one of my key priorities for my run for school board. What I have seen is that the board, the current board, and the administrators, supervisors, educators, teachers, and staff are moving in a direction of racial equity and justice in the school. They have taken it upon themselves to call in organizations, local organizations that are heading that work already. So that is incredibly encouraging to see that they're already doing this. With this new set of knowledge comes now a responsibility for us to act. And us as school board members should be leading the charge in what that action plan looks like. You know, there is an incredibly profound and deep, meaningful connection with learning what diversity is, what equity looks like, what inclusion means. But we can't stop there. We can't stop at just knowing what it means. We need to understand how we can implement this, how we can make those meaningful changes in our classrooms. Because the environment of the schools right now is incredibly challenging and incredibly difficult for students of color, for parents of color, for our LGBTQ youth. These marginalized groups have not felt welcome, have not felt supported. And a lot of that has to do with the lack of diversity that exists within staff. But we can't just say we're going to hire more Black and brown folk because that's not going to solve the problem, right? We need to look at this as a whole, as a district whole, and we need to understand that this work, this equity building, and this restorative justice practice needs to be implemented by folks of color who understand it, who live it, and who can pose solutions to these problems.
Thanks. The school board is responsible for setting policy for the district. So what, if any, policies would you want to revisit or adopt in the district if you were elected?
That's a good question. I think that the way that the school board has set their standards of governance and the way that they functioned is incredibly great. I think it's a wonderful thing to knowing that I'm stepping into something that's already has a really good, solid foundation. I think that within all of those policies and these big decisions that are coming up, again, my advocacy is for student and parent voice. And with that comes also policies that support, resource, and fund what teachers are doing off the clock, what they're doing around the clock, what they've done with COVID. The outreach that they've done has been so meaningful, but we know that our teachers aren't supported enough. And we know that they're paying out of pocket and they're using their own time and resources to make a lot of these changes happen. So one of the biggest, I think, plans that I have is taking a look at our budget and seeing really where the investment is, redistributing if necessary, so that we can put the focus and the emphasis on that, on resourcing teachers and on listening to the parent and family voice.
Janet, Ben Lapine Schools recently hired a new superintendent, as you're aware, and he's going to start later this year. Did the school board make the right call in who they hired? And secondly, what do you feel like your approach should be in steering the district's new leader in the right direction?
So I was fortunate enough to sit on one of the committee, sort of the community forums that they hosted during the superintendent search. I had also had some outreach from some folks at the school district sort of asking, you know, to participate and to answer some questions and be a part of it. From my perspective on the outside, I'm not on the school board. I don't work for Ben Lapine School Districts. From my perspective, I don't think it was a wrong choice, but I think that we could have reevaluated why the choice was made the way it was. I think that there are, again, gaps within the school board that don't identify the need for that representation. And we're talking specifically about two candidates, two incredible candidates that were put before us, right? Dr. Cook and Dr. Bellamy. And in listening and investigating by, on my own time, a little more background about these folks, I strongly felt that Dr. Bellamy was more than qualified and brought in a completely new optic and perspective that we're missing. A Black woman that is a single parent. That to me was a glimmer of hope, and it was a push, a strong push in the right direction. And so when she was not chosen, it was disappointing. It was a little disheartening, because I felt that the community voice really wasn't brought in for this choice. It really wasn't honored in what many of us as parents of color and with students of color were saying to the board and to the school district. We can't take a step back, and we can't regret the decision that we made. All we can do is move forward, and all we can do is implement plans that are going to support this new superintendent to get him to the level of where we are all at. And so it's going to take some time, and it's going to take some adjustments. I think it's going to take a lot of education and investment in ourselves as a board and in this new superintendent. But one of my strongest suits is building community and building partnerships. And so I have no issue coming into the school board fully knowing that perhaps, we don't see eye to eye, but I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to expand my awareness and my vision. And I would hope that the superintendent, from what it looks like, is doing the same.
What's your opinion on the district's policy around sex ed?
Another great question. I myself identify as a queer Indigenous person. With that comes its own unique sets of challenges. But I know that I'm not alone. I know that there are many parents out there that are within that LGBTQ spectrum, and that their children also are. When we talk about sex ed, and does it belong in school? Education is education. Whether it's sexual education or it's math, it's still education. And so for our students and families to be able to make the best decisions for their family dynamic, for the health of their family and of themselves, they need to be informed. They need to be taught. They need to be given in-depth knowledge of these issues that face some of us as, again, LGBTQ. They deserve to have comprehensive information. They deserve the resources and the skills so that, again, they can make that decision based on it. Supporting the family, supporting the community around that too, and setting goals for their future where they can take ownership and pride in those decisions that they make, knowing that it was based off of, the best forms and most comprehensive education plan that we could have given. And it should include not just sex ed is again a broad spectrum. It should include birth control. It should include education around sexually transmitted infections. What do healthy relationships look like? Puberty, sexual orientation, consent, all of those things go into sex ed. And so I am a strong supporter of bringing that to our schools and allowing families and students to advocate for themselves and be guided by those resources.
Janet, so we're going to shift the focus just a little bit. Social media has become, especially during lockdown, a really contentious thing for elected officials as they've tried to navigate COVID. But increasingly, it's something that elected officials have to address about at pretty much every aspect of their lives, no matter what they're doing. I'm just curious what your approach is to communicating via social media, and what, if any, coping strategies you use as you're about to enter into this space.
I think that as much as we hate to admit it, we're all glued to our phones. Yeah. And whether we want to be on social media or not, in one way or another, we are probably active participants. That is, I think, a change that is somewhat difficult for certain generations to move towards or to evolve to, because it has not been a positive form of communication in the past. I think oftentimes on social media, we see all that conflict, we see miscommunications, we see folks that perhaps are very passionate and very strong about a subject. And so, their words are sometimes harsh or crash or, sometimes vulgar, we might think. There is room and space for every person to feel heard, to feel acknowledged, and to state what they feel is important. The way I look at social media is that it is literally our own platform. It is our microphone. It is our 15 minutes of stage time. And so we can use that in whatever way we best see fit. Oftentimes we don't agree with it, but that's our right. That's one of our liberties that we have as Americans, is that we can go on social media and publish things that perhaps somebody's going to disagree with, but it's coming from our heart or from our perspective. It's important for me in my candidacy not to engage in some of that negativity, because I'm here to uplift and to educate. I am not here to tear down or to criticize or to judge others. And so I take it with a grain of salt. I sometimes don't respond to some of the criticism because I don't think it's helpful. I think it's more combative and it's more divisive. And I have, and will state repeatedly that if folks want to reach out and have a one-on-one, an in-depth conversation, I am open to that, because that's how we make change, is by communicating with each other, not a sentence on social media that's going to get misconstrued or misguided.
Yeah, so the next question kind of ties right into that. Sorry about that. I don't know if you could hear that. Sorry for that. What responsibilities do school board members have in terms of communication with staff, parents, and the community at large?
That is what we're there to do. We are there to listen. We are there to hold space for parents and for students and educators and teachers. I think our role is sometimes underestimated in that regard, is that we truly are in a position that is, a publicly held elected position. And if we are not willing to listen to what all of the community is saying, then I don't think we're doing our job. And so it's very important, again, for me to have that open line of communication, to show up for, whatever it is that's happening in the community, so that I can learn and so that I can grow and so that I can understand that maybe my priority looks very different from another parent's priority. And I want to understand why, what the context is around that, and how we can support it differently. So I think that it is our role to listen. I think that's our number one job, is to listen to parents and students and educators.
Thanks. So we're at the end of our formal questions. We just want to give you an opportunity now to bring up anything that we might have missed before we wrap up.
I think the only thing that I would add is highlighting the value of what I bring to the table. In my 11 years in Central Oregon, I have focused so much on building meaningful partnerships and relationships built on trust. And that spans beyond just with my own community, within the Latinx community. It's across so many sectors in the work that I do. And having that depth of connection and of partnership is critical, because and this goes back to sort of the last question, is if we are truly listening to the community, what are we doing with being intentional and outreaching those folks? What are we doing to partner with healthcare organizations? What are we doing to partner with environmental organizations too? I have that that awareness, and that, again, that asset that I bring in that through Mecca Bend, through the other role with Better Together and the Early Learning Hub, I have cemented a foundation for those relationships and have worked very closely with a lot of community members that should have a stake in our kids' education too.
Well, Janet, thank you very much for spending this time with us and giving us an opportunity to ask you questions regarding your positions and getting that out to our readers and listeners. I don't know if all of our readers and listeners know the challenges that this race is imposing that are kind of unique, and they go to the fact that we emphasize questions on communication and being accessible to all the members of the community. And again, I appreciate you taking the time and making yourself accessible and putting yourself out there in the public realm.
Thank you. I want to thank you both too. And I know how incredibly frustrating it must be to not have responses, but I'm glad that I could participate. Thank you for accommodating my schedule too. I know it's been a little crazy, but yeah,
the way it goes.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, I'm so thankful. And again, thank you for doing this. Thank you for putting this together and including me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Best of luck.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.